Good evening. Welcome to this evening. We are so excited to hear some stories, to sing some Christmas carols. You know who was one of the best storytellers of all time? Come on now, you're in church. Jesus. Jesus knew something about telling stories that connects us heart to heart, that really does physiologically lights up something in our brain. It connects in ways that just talking just doesn't. So really excited to hear a few stories tonight. And before we begin, I would like to open us in prayer. So let us pray. It is good, O God, to be together in this space. We are so grateful that you love us so much that you would send your Son to be born in a manger, and that somehow through this little person who grows up, that shows us how to live and how to love, and then makes a way for us to be forever and ever in your loving arms. Open our hearts and minds as we hear these stories tonight. In Christ's name, amen. So I want to open with a little poem from one of my favorite books by Anne Weems called Kneeling in Bethlehem. And it goes like this. In each heart lies a Bethlehem, an inn where we must ultimately answer whether there is room or not. When we are Bethlehem bound, we experience our own advent in his. When we are Bethlehem bound, we can no longer look the other way, conveniently not seeing stars nor hearing angels' voices. We can no longer excuse ourselves by busily tending our sheep or our kingdom. This Advent, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that the Lord has made known to us. In the midst of shopping sprees, let's ponder in our hearts the gift of gifts. Through the tinsel, let's look for the gold of the Christmas star. In the excitement and confusion, in the merry chaos, let's listen for the brush of angels' wings. This Advent, let's go to Bethlehem and find our kneeling places. We're going to open by singing, O Come All Ye Faithful. Well done. Our first storyteller tonight is Rick Soldat, and I'm so glad that he came before choir practice and is going to tell his story, and then he probably has to run out. But Rick, let's welcome Rick.
This is called My Favorite Christmas by Rick Soldat. I have memories of many Christmases in my life. I don't remember any bad ones, but I have many that just faded away. The Christmas when I was 7 years old when I was cool because I got a train set, an O-gauge train set, an uncharacteristically expensive gift given my family's tight budget. What I didn't know at the time was that a day or two later, my brother, 7 years my senior, was scheduled to have his tonsils removed. And so my parents sent me to my grandparents' house a town or two away so that I wouldn't bother my older brother. But it was great. I set up the train set. It kept me very occupied. It was a fun time, and I got to eat plenty of Grandma's ginger snaps and drink 7-Up, a big treat back then. I think my best Christmas as an adult was ironically at a time when we were operating on a tight budget. My then wife and I had moved from suburban Chicago to Rockford, about 90 miles away, and I had taken a job at a TV station. I wasn't making all that much money, but I liked my job. My wife was busy being a full-time mom to our 2 sons, who were ages 2 and 4. We had bought a house, which was the biggest and oldest one on the block. When we stepped into the house for the first time, we knew instantly this was the house for us. It had lots of beautifully stained and varnished woodwork, 9-foot ceilings. Some of the windows had upper sections with intricate leaded glass. It had a recently renovated kitchen and a formal dining room with generous living room and a fireplace and a window seat with big windows facing south. The low in the sun December sun, there we go, had flooded the kitchen, the rooms with light and warmth. In the summer, a row of mature deciduous trees blocked much of the sunlight, allowing the home to stay relatively cool. The house also had a parlor with a large wooden pocket door. We used the parlor as the kids' playroom. It also had a big yard and a swing and a sandbox for the kids. As Christmas approached, we wanted to have a nice holiday while doing it on a budget. My wife went to yard sales and church rummage sales looking for used Fisher-Price toys for the kids. She cleaned them thoroughly and then ran them through the dishwasher just to make sure they were completely sanitized. Then we carefully wrapped them up and hid them away for December 25th. We drove to a local Christmas tree farm and cut down a big tree and brought it home to put up in the room we called the foyer. This was my favorite room in the house. There was a stairway with a landing at one end and a leaded glass window at the other. That's where we put the Christmas tree. My wife didn't want to take a chance on our 2 curious youngsters that they would get hurt on glass ornaments or hooks on the lower branches of the tree, so she constructed ornaments made of felt. Instead of hooks, she put loops made of yarn to keep them on the tree. The boys helped us decorate the tree. It was a beautiful family event. There was Christmas music playing in the background with homemade cookies made by my wife. I don't remember whether she and I woke up first on Christmas morning or if the kids wakened us. I can't recall. But what I do remember is coming down our beautiful stairway, seeing the Christmas tree meticulously decorated and illuminated with lots of lights. There were presents under the tree and stockings hung by the fireplace. I remember the excitement in the kids' voices as they opened their gifts, seeing the delight on their young faces. We watched them play with their toys, and we counted our blessings. The boys had no idea these toys were not new. They didn't care whether they came in the original boxes. They were happy and content to have what they had. There was an innocence and a simplicity to that Christmas. That was before computer games, the internet, smartphones. I struggle to find words to describe it, but it was real. We didn't have much in the way of material possessions, but we were together as a family, and we shared the gift of love. I guess you could say it was my Hallmark Christmas. The world has changed since then. As much as I would like to go back, I can't. But I think there are new ways to recreate the essence, the simplicity of that Christmas. I just need to quiet my mind, wait on the Lord, and ask for Jesus to show me the way. I suspect that means a focus on others and not myself. Merry Christmas.
And we're going to sing, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Thank you. Faye Mercer is going to come up and tell us a little story from, I believe, Germany when she was a little girl. Close?
Well, as Lori said, I'm from Germany, and I came over when I was 9 years old. So this Christmas stories go way back to 48, 49, 50. So things were a lot different than they are now, and I'm sure that what I experienced, Germany has grown just like any other country and has gotten very commercialized, just like in the U.S. So, but first of all, we didn't have a Santa Claus, but Santa Claus was called Nikolaus, and but they really weren't the same like Santa Claus. On December 6th of December, all children placed their polished shoes, one shoe, in front of their door. And during the night, Nikolaus would come, and he would fill your shoe with goodies, just like your stockings, I guess. Nuts, mostly nuts, a little bit of candy, and maybe a tiny little present. If you were lucky, maybe you could put your father's shoe out there instead of your own. Or maybe even if somebody had a boot, but it didn't always work. Anyways, that tradition of December 6th is still going on in Germany. And I had to actually look this up. It comes from the 4th century, and it was a Greek bishop named St. Nicholas who loved to give gifts and used to leave coins in people's shoes. And so that's where this came from, where it continued on as Nikolaus. Then also, instead of coal, like you sometimes can get here in your stocking, there would be a switch. It would be like branches tied together and put into your shoe if you weren't good. I don't think I ever got that, but who can remember that? I don't know. We did go to church on Christmas Eve, and it's celebrated. Christmas was celebrated Christmas Eve, and whatever toys might be available for you, you receive Christmas Eve. So after church, we weren't not allowed to go into the living room. So my sister and I had to wait in another room, and then the Christmas trees back then, and some of them probably still today, have real candles on them. And so that you don't have fires or anything. My mother used to use apples instead of balls, and hung them on the limbs, because that would make the limbs come down, and then you would put your candles on there. And there was very little other decorations on the tree. Tinsels was one of them, and sometimes some cookies that have like a hole in the middle of them, or a chocolate that has a hole in the middle, and she would tie a string around them and hang that on the tree. And then when it was all lit and everything, my sister and I were allowed to come into the living room. But even then, we couldn't do anything, because you had to either recite a poem or sing a carol. And not having a voice, I did not enjoy that at all. But anyways, so once that was done, then you were able to go ahead and open presents. And the presents didn't come from Santa Claus. The presents came from your parents. You may have, I do remember once sitting on a Santa Claus or Nicolaus's lap, but I think the only purpose of that was for him to tell your parents what you wanted. It was not that he is the one that brought the presents. So I think that's about it. I do remember only one present that sticks out, and I was only like 5 or 6, and I wanted a baby doll carriage. And I did get that. However, when I went to put my baby doll in there, there was all crayons and all that sort of stuff written on the inside of the baby carriage. And my mother says, "Oh, well, that's only because the angels played with it first."
So did anyone grow up singing O Tannenbaum? So we did. I'm sure we didn't pronounce it right, but Faye is going to not sing, but she's going to read through the lyrics for us, and then we're going to sing it, and then we'll sing O Christmas Tree after we butcher O Tannenbaum. But first we get to hear how it's supposed to be.
Okay, it's O Tannenbaum, wie grün sind deine Blätter. Du blühst nicht nur in Sommerzeit, doch auch im Winter, wenn es schneit. That's a little different here than I remembered. Oh, du grünst nicht nur zur Sommerzeit, nein, auch im Winter, wenn es schneit. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter.
Dr. Will Brown is our very own pastor teacher here, is going to come up and tell us a little story.
When I agreed to this was something Mingy and I were going to do together. As usual, she's somewhere else. Most of you know that my parents were missionaries and that I grew up in India. Our school, where my parents taught, had their long summer vacation in the winter, so we would travel in the winter, and we celebrated Christmas in many different parts of India. The story I want to tell comes from a trip we made with 3 other missionary couples down to a little seaside town called Gopalpur. It was mostly a fishing village with a little bit of tourism on the side and some education through the Catholic Church. We stayed in the Baptist guest house. None of us were Baptists, but Presbyterian money worked. So we stayed in the Baptist guest house, and we would walk to the beach, which was about 2 miles. Downhill, it was kind of nice. Coming back, the guest house was on the top of the tallest hill around there. Right next to the guest house was a searchlight. And then next to that was this tiny little Protestant church where I had my first taste of wine, much to my father's disgust. They didn't pay close enough attention to what was happening. On Christmas Eve that year, we went down and we spent the day swimming in the Bay of Bengal, and then we began our walk back, and it was getting darker as we walked back, and you get to the bottom of the hill, and then the road winds up for the elevation of 300 or 400 feet to get to the guest house. About halfway up the hill, there was a Roman Catholic enclave, meaning there was a convent, and there was a Roman Catholic church, and there was a Roman Catholic school. And we tried to be nice to them, and they were nice to us as well. But on this night, as we came up about halfway, we looked over to the church and saw that there was this great crowd of people outside, and they looked very excited, and they were dressed fancy, and they were singing songs which we took to be Christmas songs. But despite the fact that between the parents that were there, they spoke about 12 different languages, nobody spoke the language there in what was the state that we used to call Orissa and actually is now called Odisha. And the language is called Odia. And none of us spoke Odia. And so we had no idea what it was that they were singing, but they seemed very happy. And we noticed that there was this little manger right by the door to the church, and then with the great fanfare and yelling, we noticed that there was a light that was starting to come from the top of the tree in front of the church, and it was coming down, obviously coming down on a wire that we couldn't see, to come to a stop over the manger. The Star of Bethlehem was coming. The fact that it was made like a paper airplane with bamboo and glued on paper, we never could figure out the significance of that, and we couldn't ask. So the star gets there, and then the shepherds come, and they bring animals with them, and the wise men come, and they brought donkeys. They didn't have any camels. And then finally, Mary and Joseph and the baby came. And everybody launched into great singing, and they were singing over by the church, and we were singing on the road, and it was just a wonderful celebration. And in that moment, all of the divisions, which were quite intense in parts of India, between Roman Catholics and Protestants, just sort of disappeared. They were glad that we were there singing, and we were glad that they were there. We went on up from that church to our guest house up on top, and went in, and we had some dinner. And then partway through the dinner, the cook, who had been hired by the Baptist Council, came and motioned for us to come outside. And the significance of that is he also spoke only Odia. None of us spoke Odia. And the Baptist just said, "You've got him, and whatever he gives you to eat, So we couldn't communicate with him. We couldn't tell him what we liked or what we didn't like, but he called us all outside, and there was a semicircle of people sitting there, 40 or 50 people sitting there, and they didn't seem the best dressed people. They weren't like the Roman Catholics, and we had trouble figuring out what was going on, and finally we were able to discern that this was sort of the local beggars guild. And the tradition was that they would go to the Catholic Church and they would be given presents and food, and then they would come up the hill and find out who was at the Baptist place, and they would get food and something to drink off of the people in the bungalow as well. And so we got to distribute all of the fruit and the food and the money that the cook had the foresight to get. No one ever told him to do it that we knew of, but he knew to have dozens and dozens of oranges and other things for us to hand out to that group of people, and they were so grateful and so polite, and there were 10 of us kids, and we got to be the ones to take the fruit around, and I had my cheek pinched a lot, and but it was a very good feeling that the beggars were really glad we were there, and at the end we were glad that they were too. And so we went in and we kept on eating our dinner, and then the cook came again and motioned us outside, and there was a new group of people sitting where that old group of people was. And we thought, how long is this game going to go on? And it didn't seem like the cook had any more oranges, so that wasn't a good sign at all. And then we noticed that one of the men in the group was wearing a tie, and that was certainly not something that the beggars had done. And it turned out he could speak a little English, so that was a great thing as well. And it turns out that this was not a group of beggars, but that this was a group of Baptists. They were from the local Baptist church, and they had heard that there were missionaries up on top of the hill, and so they wanted to find out, and so the whole congregation got up and walked up the hill to see what was going on in the Baptist bungalow. And one of their first questions was, is anybody a pastor, a padre? Well, my father was a padre. So, of course, he had to say a prayer. And my father has a skill that I have never learned, and that is to preach to pray long prayers. And they seemed to be really impressed by the length of the prayer. I don't think any of them but the pastor could understand a word that was being said. But the pastor said, we want to worship with you. Rather than have our worship down in our little church down in the town, we want to worship with you here at this place. And so we worshiped together, and they would read some scripture in Odia, and we would read something in English, and they would sing a carol, and we would sing one, and of course we couldn't understand theirs, and they couldn't understand ours. But it was evident the more the service went on that we were sharing the same experience, that this was Christmas. And it didn't matter whether we could understand them or not, because we all knew the story forwards and backwards, just like they did. And no one had to explain anything to us. We got it. We recognized that it was Christmas and that Christ had been born. And they were just very happy. And then they came and they got us all by the hand, and they took us and they sat us down in a semicircle in the front lawn, sitting where the group before them had sat and then where they had sat. And then they produced from we don't know where food to which they used to feed us. And it was a terribly instructive time for us kids. I was maybe 10 at that time. To see the respect with which the cook and the parents treated the beggars that came and how they felt respected, and then to see how these church people, even though they couldn't communicate with us, felt like they were brothers and sisters to us because they shared a belief in the same Jesus. And it was kind of interesting that the one song that we both seemed to know the same tune to is the one you're going to sing next, which is Silent Night, Holy Night. And we sang that in English, and they sang it in Odia. But we all rejoiced that we could share that together and know that wherever we went in the world, we were going to run into Christians, and we didn't have to understand them because we knew the same message. Jesus Christ is Lord. Thanks be to God.
Christmas Comes by Ann Weems. Christmas comes every time we see God in other persons. The human and the holy meet in Bethlehem or in Times Square. For Christmas comes like a golden storm on its way to Jerusalem, determinedly, inevitably. Even now it comes, in the face of hatred and warring, no atrocity too terrible to stop it, no Herod strong enough, no hurt deep enough, no curse shocking enough, no disaster shattering enough. For someone on earth will see the star, someone will hear the angel voices, someone will run to Bethlehem, someone will know peace and goodwill. The Christ will be born. I'd like to invite Tom Weber to come up to share his story.
When I chose the hymn that, or I call it a hymn, it's a song. You blew it. It's the same thing. It's one we sing home for Christmas. She objected, I think you objected, that it wasn't in the hymnal. Anyway, I submit that that should be in the hymnal, and it should be the first one, because where were Joseph and Mary going? Home for the holidays, right? They were headed to Joseph's hometown so he could have them meet the wife. So it should be in the hymnal. It's a hymn. Good one. Never mind that it took about 700 years for it to be declared a holiday and another 2 millennia before Perry Como sang it, but that's good enough. Close enough. I need to do a little prologue on this before I get into my story. My wife and I had entirely different childhood memories of Christmas. I came from a rather large family, particularly on my father's side, so the 2 weeks or 3 weeks of Christmas were constant visitations back and forth, going to somebody's home. You all remember that, right? That's when you went to see their tree, see the train under the tree, you know, and do all those things. We just saw everybody. On my father's side, I had 35 first cousins. You know, there was a lot of people to see. And then on Christmas Day, we always had it with my mother's side of the family. We always had the big get-together the whole day, not just 2 hours for dinner, the whole day to fill in. My wife, on the other hand, she was a product of a wartime marriage that didn't last long enough for her to meet her father. So it was just her mother and her two grandparents who had emigrated from England, so they had no relatives here. So the family at Christmas time was 4 people, right? So entirely different experiences. And she loved the idea of having a big family Christmas. Now, when we were dating, she told me that she wanted to have 16 children. She even had names for all of them. I should have dumped her there. But she had sunk the hook too deep. It was, I was a goner. So anyway, now let me fast forward. We had, most of our early marriage, we were either at my parents' house or they came to visit us or something like that. There was always a pretty big effort for Christmas. 1981, I believe, and I'm glad my daughter's not here. She threatened to come and be a fact checker, so. Anyway, I think it was 1981. We had moved to Chicago. I was transferred to Chicago. Well met if anybody's here from that area. And this would be our second Christmas. The first Christmas we went to Michigan. So this was our second Christmas. So we had 3 kids. We had our oldest was in high school, second in middle school, and the third one, Terry, was 8, I think, at the time. And then we had a foster son who was 21, 22, and he came to visit from Omaha with the young lady who was going to become his wife. So we were a nice family unit, right? We got together on Christmas morning, and this is it. This is our nuclear family, and we're doing well and everything. And we started opening the presents. I looked over, and my wife, Dee, was crying. In fact, she was bawling is what she was doing. She was just beside herself. What's wrong? My parents weren't there. They should be there. Well, there was nothing for it. We had to get to Michigan. So plane was out of the question at that time. So we called the train service, Amtrak, and I don't know if they still do it, but they loved to overbook coaches back in that day. So we barely made the train for the ride to Chicago. We found seats for Tom's girlfriend, for my wife and Terry, but the 2 boys, or 3 boys and myself, we had to stand from Chicago to Detroit. Most of the time spent between the cars because it was a little easier to stand there than between seats if you've ever stood in a coach. Pretty bad. We got there. My mother and father and brother met us with 2 cars to take our out to my uncle's house at that time. He was hosting the dinner that time, so everybody was there, and she was happy, and it was Christmas. You really have to be home for Christmas, and one of the sad things about the way we've become spread out over the country is so much is that we don't have those huge family gatherings anymore. And Christmas is the time. Thanksgiving just doesn't cut it very bit. So it's best to be home for Christmas.
Did we start? probably good for this one. That's good. Phew. Thank you. Pretty good job. We don't know that as well as some of the others, probably. So Anita Lustria is going to come up and share her story, but I do not want to forget to thank our beautiful friend Ann Owens for playing for us tonight. So good.
I was glad for only one verse. That's kind of high. Like doing my best. Oh, wow, these stories have been great. This has been so delightful. Well, often at Christmas, we think about what we get, right? Especially kids. You're thinking about, what am I going to get? Well, I'm going to tell a story about what I lost. It was 1969. I was 9 years old. My mom and dad and me and my two brothers were packed into our car like sardines, and all the Christmas gifts were crammed in the trunk as we were heading north from the Philadelphia area to Littleton, Maine. Not a trip for the faint of heart. Let me tell you, you take I-95 all the way to the north to the last exit on I-95 before you enter Canada. And then you get on Route 1 and drive 15 more miles. So we were headed to my grandparents' farm, and we were headed for a family Christmas like no other. It was the first time that we'd been back, to Maine at least, for Christmas since we had moved away about 4 years earlier, when my dad accepted a call to be a pastor in the Philadelphia area, in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, if any of you are from that area. But I missed Maine. I really missed Maine. I missed my grandparents. I missed running around the farm, picking flowers and raspberries, and helping my grandmother run the roadside farm stand, and fishing for some of the best trout east of the Mississippi, and pumping drinking water from the well. And the winter things that I missed, well, they were big fires that my grandpa built in the wood stove that warmed the whole house, and listening in the second floor down through the registers to the adult conversations, right? And the amazing molasses cookies that my grandpa baked. I did not, however, miss going to the outhouse at any time of year. Did not miss that, but especially in the winter. And I was always afraid I'd fall through the hole, all right? Yeah, I mean, I was only 9 years old then, scared to death, did not like it. Well, my grandpa was one of my favorite people on the planet. He was a farmer during Maine's intense northern growing season, and he was the head baker at the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel in Clearwater, Florida during the winter. And he was an all-around jokester, just a jovial guy. And I remember when he put me on his lap on the tractor to teach me how to drive when I was 4. And then he jumped down off the tractor and ran along beside it while I screamed at the top of my lungs for him to hop back on and rescue me and take the wheel. And I was sure I was going to crash, even though I was in a wide open field with no obstacles anywhere in sight, thankfully. But we were heading to Maine, to that farm. Wiser folks would not have headed to northern Maine in the winter, but we found ourselves bound for the North Woods that Christmas. And in some ways, nothing changed, but in a lot of ways, everything changed that year. I was only 9, but I found myself growing beyond my years that December. We made the trip not because we missed our grandparents so much, though we did, for sure, but because my grandpa was dying of cancer. I don't know about you, but I can remember, and maybe you can too, moments in your life when time stood still, right? When the camera lens of life just brought everything into focus. And it was that Christmas for me. I've had 63 Christmases so far, 64th on the horizon. And I heard someone else say this earlier, it's hard to remember Christmas gifts from all those Christmases. I don't think I can remember a single gift, but that Christmas, I can give you the litany of gifts given to me. I got a frilly bathrobe, a stroller for my favorite doll. I got a melodica. Do you remember those small handheld things? You blew into it and it had little keys. You played like piano. And a stuffed, super soft koala bear. Yeah. And I would have given all those gifts back for the assurance that my grandpa would get better. And of course, now I've had years to look back on that Christmas. And what it boils down to for me is this. That Christmas, it was an incredible experience. So many good things were contained in it. And yet, as a kid, I was experiencing the very real fear of losing my grandpa. In a minute, we're going to sing another carol, and it has the lyrics in it, the hopes and fears of all the years. And that was true for me in my very young years. I was experiencing exactly that. I had hopes and I had fears. And I had a faith that even at 9, I could see how maybe, just maybe, Jesus could help me hold both my hopes and my fears close to my heart. You all, I'm sure, know this, but we have many conversions in our lives, right? All different kinds of conversions along the way, and maybe this was one of mine. And it pointed me to the ultimate one whose birth we're awaiting this Advent season, where the hopes and fears of all the years come together, where the hopes and fears of all the years are held in tension, and where the hopes and fears of all the years are indeed met in him tonight, this very night. And so, will you sing that carol with me, O Little Town of Bethlehem? And maybe you have your own hopes and fears, right? That you might think about as we sing this carol together, and hold them in your heart.
So nice. So our last storytellers tonight are Norman and Joan Pritchard, and they are going to come tell us the last story of the evening.
He'll do it there. It is on. Yes, it is on. As you all know, you can find Presbyterians all over the world. And across the years, you could have encountered these two Presbyterians in places as far apart as Scotland, Australia, and then Michigan, and now Florida. And that's what we want to share with you tonight. But there's one more country involved also.
Ireland. I was born in Ireland and lived there in my early years. My parents were Presbyterians, but the Presbyterian church we went to, which was called First Presbyterian Church, Omagh, County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. There were quite a lot of Presbyterians in Northern Ireland. We'll not get into the politics of Ireland, but that's a whole different thing. And they didn't have a Christmas Day service, and they didn't have a Christmas Eve service. But I was a kid, and I liked getting presents. So the highlight was definitely getting presents on Christmas Day. In those days in Ireland, pleasures were simple. Most people did not have a television, and those people who did had a small black and white television. Some of you might actually even remember that, but this place was much more advanced than ours.
Nobody's as old as you are. No.
Anyway, and it might have had 2 or maybe even 3 channels, and that was it. Children then didn't have cell phones. I'm pretty glad about that, but that meant that I really had to read comics and books like that. And I did get some pocket money, a tiny bit. So I would walk down to the local newsagent, buy a comic that was called School Friend. It may have been a British kind of comic. I don't know whether that was here in America or not, but I loved School Friend. And the publishers of School Friend made an annual every year at the end of the year, and that was high on my list for Santa Claus. Actually, somebody was talking from Germany about putting shoes out for little gifts. Oh no, not us. I had a twin brother, a younger brother, and a sister, and we put out pillowcases. Just saying. Okay, but I did always get the annual, and that was my joy. And by the time it was breakfast, I'd almost finished reading it from cover to cover. Thank you. The highlight of Christmas Day, though, in Ireland and throughout the United Kingdom was always the big Christmas dinner, very much like the Thanksgiving dinner in the United States, but there were a couple of differences.
The first difference was the
That wasn't meant to happen.
the Christmas crackers. These things were on the table with one of these for everyone, and you pulled them.
And they bang.
They contained, yes, this I think will blow. Can you imagine that all through Christmas dinner? Oh. And they had paper hats, which happily we can't find. Actually, it's coming in a minute. I've only got 2 hands. I'm going for the little sheet of paper, though, because, hang on, this is. There we are. You had to wear the Christmas hats all through the meal. And then the little bit of paper, which I have just found, had some absolutely terrible, appalling jokes. Things like, why is it getting harder to buy Advent calendars? Because their days are numbered. What comes at the end of Christmas Day? The letter Y. And my all-time favorite, what is Santa's favorite pizza? One that's deep pan, crisp, and even.
Okay, well, We finished the meal always with a Christmas pudding. You might call it figgy puddings in one of the songs, but Christmas pudding. We made that ourselves. I'll not go into how that's made. That's a very long story, and it takes a very long time. But the Christmas pudding was a delight, and that was at the end of the meal. We brought the pudding to the dinner table. We poured brandy over the top. We lit the brandy. Lots of fun. And then we served it up with, guess what? Brandy sauce. At the age of 14, my parents moved from Ireland to Scotland.
And that was actually where we met. But when I was growing up in Scotland, Christmas was an incredibly low-key affair. You know how Presbyterians can be the biggest killjoys in the world? Well, Scottish Presbyterians have that like no one else. Really, in Scotland, the General Assembly passed rules saying that pastors weren't allowed to celebrate Christmas because their Reformed conviction was that only those worship acts which were commanded in Scripture were worthy of a church service. So Jesus told us to baptize. Do this in remembrance of me. The two sacraments were mandated. They were commanded by Jesus, and so they were included in worship. Everything else was a no-no for centuries. There was a time, actually, when the General Assembly met on Christmas Day to make sure no pastor was in his church celebrating Christmas. So as you can imagine, growing up, well, Scotland was coming out of that heritage, but only just. So things like Christmas lights were kind of understated. They weren't too exciting, they weren't too gaudy, they weren't too inspiring. And I suspect it was probably because of television that Scots learned what people were doing in other parts of the world, even in that dreadful place south of the border. And so in time, Scots learned to celebrate with proper Christmas lights and dress the city up to make it look beautiful. Not quite as effective as the Christmas lights in our town. Sarasota is looking fabulous right now, but at least we Scots learned how to develop the Christmas spirit and share the joy of Christmas. Then Joan and I got married, and after a number of years as a minister in Scotland, I was called to a church in Australia. I became the senior minister of the Scots Church in Melbourne. There I discovered they had not only a Christmas Eve service, they also had a Christmas Day service. The church was packed. People came from who knows where, and the congregation sang all the traditional Christmas carols. But Australia being Australia, they wanted to add a little more to it. Now, you need to remember that Australia is literally and metaphorically upside down. It's at the bottom half of the world, and Christmas is in midsummer. Easter is in fall, so no spring lambs for Easter. Christmas in summertime. And in the city of Melbourne, that's the church I was called to, kind of Presbyterian cathedral. It was an absolutely beautiful place and a wonderful, wonderful music ministry. In Australia, in the southern states and the southern cities, the wind would come across the continent. The arid desert, the blisteringly hot desert, and the north wind could send the temperatures, even in a city like Melbourne, soaring well above 100 degrees, which made the traditional Christmas dinner with brandy sauce and all that stuff something of a challenge. But the Australians wanted to localize Christmas as well. So we were introduced to a number of distinctively Australian Christmas carols. One of our favorite is the one that says, "The north wind is tossing the leaves, the red dust is over the town, the sparrows are under the eaves, and the grass in the paddock is brown, as we lift up our voices and sing to the Christ child, the heavenly King."
It's got a nice, easygoing melody. Listen. The day after Christmas, of course, it was summer, and the children were on vacation from school. They get long holidays in Australia, and the kids and the parents love that. So we packed everything up and headed off to the beach for the summer vacation.
The north wind provided a very different experience when we moved to Michigan. Come wintertime, we could be faced with temperatures down around 20 degrees, but the benefit of that was that we could now get a white Christmas. And of course, in the gloom of a Michigan winter, when it gets dark at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all the lovely Christmas lights in the houses made it a wonderful place to be at that time. And so for the first time in 20 years, we only held a Christmas Day service if December 25 fell on a Sunday. Christmas Eve was the big thing. And among the 5 services we held, a couple of them were for the youth of the church, and so the youth pastor was charged with creating an outdoor nativity scene. And all the kids in the congregation, dressed in bathrobes and towels for their heads and all that sort of stuff, took part in the live nativity. They all got a chance to take part because we had to run shifts of 15 minutes only. Otherwise, the poor little mutts would have frozen to death outside for all that time. So pity the youth pastor. The year 3 sheep escaped from the live nativity. And the poor guy spent the best part of an hour, because the church was on a very large campus. The poor guy spent the best part of an hour chasing those animals to get them back into the corral for the live nativity to be properly resumed. But at least the guy was warm that Christmas. Our 5 services reminded me that one of the joys of Christmas is that everyone wants to be part of it. People we haven't seen in church for who knows how long feel it important to be in Christmas worship and sharing in the joy of the coming of Christ. Even these unfortunate people. One Christmas Eve, the services were all over, the church was locked up, and it was probably sometime after 1 a.m. that I was walking across the west parking lot to head to the manse, when this car roared in to the parking lot. 1 a.m., remember? The window was wound down, and this guy says to me, "Excuse me, Father." Great way to address a Presbyterian pastor, right? "Excuse me, Father, "What time is midnight mass?" And I said, "Oh, sorry, you've kind of missed it. You know, it's now 1:15 in the morning." And then off they headed, looking for a church whose midnight mass did not begin quite as punctually as you might have expected. But it said to me that they wanted to be in church. They had caught at least something of the meaning of Christmas, that this was something worth celebrating. This was something that needed to call forth worship from even the most unlikely of people. So as God in his providence has taken us to different continents and different experiences, we've rejoiced in the fact that in all the different ones, there has been the joy of Christmas. And so the carol we want to tie this with is the one actually we finished with in church on Sunday. Thank you for that. Joy to the world.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our stories and carols. We will see you at one of the many Christmas services over the next few days, starting at the longest night, and then to the beach, and then over there, not in here, over there. Merry Christmas. Thanks to all the storytellers.